They said it couldn't be done, that a nation buried in poverty and silence could never rise again. But in the heart of West Africa, one man refused to bow to the weight of corruption and foreign control. As the rivers of Burkina Faso carried away the past, he began building something no one believed possible. A symbol of strength born from what the world had thrown away. Each recycled bottle became a message. Africa will rise on its own terms, but when power is challenged, enemies awaken. So, the question remains, how far will a leader go to defend the soul of his nation? Before the world knew his name, Ibrahim Traoré was just another soldier walking the dusty roads of Burkina Faso, a man raised by hardship, guided by principle, and bound by a deep love for his people. His mornings began long before the sun, with the distant echo of drums and the hum of life waking in the villages. Farmers toiled in dry fields, mothers fetched water from fading wells, and children studied by candlelight, dreaming of a future that always seemed just out of reach. Traoré saw it all. He felt the quiet anger that hung in the air, the weight of promises broken by leaders who served foreign masters instead of their own people. He believed that Africa's chains were no longer made of iron, but of greed, corruption, and silence. Among his fellow soldiers, he was known for his discipline, but it was his compassion that set him apart. He shared his food, listened to the poor, and spoke of a new kind of freedom, one born not from violence, but from unity and dignity. Yet behind his calm eyes, a storm was building. The country he loved was being sold piece by piece, and those who dared to speak out disappeared quietly into the night. Ibrahim knew that change was coming, and that when it arrived, it would demand everything from him. Because in a land where truth itself had become dangerous, silence was no longer an option. The first signs of unrest began quietly. Whispers carried through the markets, murmurs exchanged between farmers and soldiers. Prices soared, food grew scarce, and promises from the capital turned to dust. Ibrahim Traoré watched as the people's patience, once endless, began to crack. Every village visit told the same story. Families struggling to eat while politicians arrived in convoys of luxury cars, speaking of progress that no one could see. He spoke softly at first, urging his men to remember who they served. "We are not the army of the powerful," he said. "We are the sons of the people." His words spread like wildfire among the young soldiers. Men who were tired of watching their nation's wealth flow into foreign hands while their mothers wept in hunger. But in the corridors of power, those words were seen as rebellion. Orders were issued, names were marked. A silent warning swept through the barracks. Anyone speaking of unity or reform would face consequences. Some were transferred, others vanished. Still, Traoré refused to bow. He had seen too much to stay silent now. At night, he met secretly with community leaders, students, and elders. Men and women who still believed that dignity could not be bought or stolen. They spoke not of vengeance, but of rebuilding, of reclaiming what it meant to be African, free from manipulation and fear. Yet each meeting came with risk. One wrong word, one informer, and everything would collapse. The walls themselves seemed to listen. Every sound of boots outside made hearts freeze. But even as danger closed in, something powerful was awakening, a spirit that could not be silenced. Then came the breaking point. A convoy of foreign aid trucks, meant for starving families, was intercepted and rerouted to private warehouses owned by ministers. When the news spread, outrage erupted across the country. Protests filled the streets. Soldiers refused orders. The government responded with force, and blood was spilled. That night, Traoré stood before his men, the flicker of firelight casting shadows across his face. "If we do nothing," he said quietly, "we are no different from those who betray us." His voice was calm, but behind it burned something unstoppable: conviction. From that moment, there was no turning back. Messages flashed across the country. A movement was forming, one that no longer asked for justice but demanded it. The people, once divided by fear, began to move as one. The power of unity, long buried under oppression, was rising again. But as hope spread through the villages, so did the danger. The regime tightened its grip, determined to crush the rebellion before it could ignite. Spies infiltrated the camps. Radios went silent, and somewhere deep inside the capital, a decision was made. Ibrahim Traoré would have to be stopped, no matter the cost, because when one man dares to defy an empire built on silence, the world begins to listen. The night the soldiers moved, the sky was heavy with thunder, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. In the distance, the capital glowed with unease. Government loyalists were preparing their final strike, determined to silence the uprising before dawn. Inside an old army compound, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a handful of loyal men. Their faces were weary, their uniforms torn, but their eyes burned with something no weapon could destroy: belief. Radios crackled with fragments of chaos, Arrests, gunfire, silence. The city was trembling between two futures, one ruled by fear and one born of courage. Then came the message they all dreaded. They're coming. Armored vehicles rolled through the streets. Helicopters circled above. Every heartbeat sounded like a countdown. Yet, amidst the thunder and gunfire, Traoré's voice remained steady. They can take our lives, he said, but they will never take the people's will to be free. When the first shots tore through the night, there was no retreat. The compound erupted. Flashes of light, cries of defiance, and the deafening roar of a nation refusing to kneel. Traoré moved through the smoke, helping the die. Wounded, shouting orders, refusing to hide. Bullets shattered the walls around him, but he stood tall, not as a soldier of war, but as a guardian of hope. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. In that storm of chaos and betrayal, one truth became clear. This fight was no longer about survival. It was about identity, dignity, and the right to stand as Africans, unbroken. And when the sun finally rose, the world would see not a fallen army, but a reborn nation. As the sound of battle faded and the sky burned red, Traoré looked to the horizon, the beginning of something greater than himself. Because sometimes, the price of freedom is everything. When the smoke cleared, silence fell over the streets of Ouagadougou. The sounds of gunfire had faded, replaced by the quiet murmur of a nation waking from its long nightmare. In the days that followed, whispers of what had happened spread like wildfire, how a young soldier had stood against corruption, how the people had risen beside him, and how courage had spoken louder than fear. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a name. He had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of rebirth. His stand had reminded an entire continent that leadership is not measured by titles or power, but by the courage to do what is right when everything is at stake. Across Africa, his story echoed through villages and cities alike. Young men and women saw in him the reflection of their own struggles, the battle to reclaim dignity, to own their future, to no longer wait for permission to rise. But victory came with a cost. Lives were lost, wounds were deep, and the path ahead remained uncertain. Yet, in that uncertainty, something remarkable had taken root: unity. For the first time in years, the people of Burkina Faso walked with their heads high, not as victims of circumstance, but as authors of their destiny. The world watched in disbelief as a small nation reminded humanity of a simple truth: freedom is never given. It is earned through sacrifice, faith, and unbreakable will. And though the fight against injustice is far from over, one question now burns in the hearts of millions. If one